Alrighty, we're back. First thing I have to say is congratulations to you because of your appointment to Princeton. I know that was made official middle of the summer, so I assume you're in your office now. I don't know. It looks like you're in an office space right now at Princeton, so congratulations to that. I'm sure that's very exciting to get going there.
Yeah, thank
How,
you. Yeah,
how,
we just got started about a month ago.
yeah, how was? Well, I know you were at Cornell, so it actually
hmm
probably wasn't that much of a big deal to move from Cornell to Princeton, but I know some of those across the countries can be a little bit crazy, but from Ithaca to Princeton probably isn't too bad. So
Yeah, I think it was pretty straightforward for my students to come down here ahead of time and find housing. And then in terms of transporting, some of the lab supplies that we brought, a
mhm.
4 hour drive is much easier than across the country or coast to coast.
Right, right. I know you were at Princeton before as a graduate student. Actually, before we kind of get to all that, your graduate work, and obviously your assistant professor now and what you do now. Definitely like to start with some general background for you, and just so that the viewers can definitely get to know you a little bit. I know you went to your undergrad was at University of Wisconsin in Green Bay. I assume you're probably from that area. Then I don't really. I assume you're from the farmlands of the Wisconsin cheeseheads, but
Yeah,
I'll let you kind of take the reins on that a little bit. Um,
sure. Yeah, so born and raised in Wisconsin, definitely from farmlands. I grew up on a family dairy farm, and so I'm the youngest of four daughters. And so
oh
we
wow,
we helped my dad run the family farm. And so when I was little, I would help my sisters, take care of the cows, milk the cows, do field work.
yeah,
Eventually, we transitioned to more of a beef cattle farm
hmm
and cash cropping, which is what they've been doing since. But yeah, that was definitely my upbringing. Working in the fields from dawn until dusk in the summer, and waking up early to milk the cows, and then going to school. Like that
yeah, right.
entire lifestyle was I think pretty good training, right? It certainly gives you a good sense of work ethic
Oh,
and
for
what it
sure.
takes to run something like that. So I value that early training.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, that must have been. I'm sure you have a lot of fun memories of like. I mean, obviously, like you said, your dad running the farm, but then you and your sisters like working it with him. I'm sure there's a lot of good camaraderie there. That sounds
yeah,
like
yeah,
so,
yeah.
definitely sounds like difficult work. Dusk can be like 4:30, 5 a.m., but or I should say dawn. But I'm sure you have a lot of good memories with that. How when you went to go, were was your parents always like wanted you to go pursue education, or they like I don't know if any of them wanted to take over the farm, or I don't know, like they didn't want to like put that kind of passion on you or whatever.
Yeah, so I think as the youngest of my sisters, I had the least expectations, so I
Fair
could
enough.
kind of do what I wanted to do. I don't think that they really promoted
Right.
seeking higher education. It was just something that one of my sisters had gone to college at UW Green Bay. So I had, spent some time there visiting her and sort of saw what it was like. She's also actually a chemistry major. And then I think, yeah, my training in high school, I went to a local high school and I really loved science, in particular biology. Like I loved doing the dissections and
Oh God.
that experience.
I
Yeah.
remember dissecting a frog in biology, and I was like, "This is not for me." Like, I get queasy when I look at my own blood, let alone like I can't do that kind of stuff. But
hmm
good for you, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, once I went to college, we were dissecting cats, and that
Oh my
that that
God.
was a little bit much because I love cats and I have cats. Um,
Yeah, what
yeah,
is
you
it?
really
Why is
have
it
to
okay to
separate yourself from.
what did you dissect in high school then? Like what were you dissecting? Was it
Um,
like
I think
bugs?
it
I don't
it
know.
may have just been like bugs or
Like,
frog or something like that.
okay.
Yeah, so
That's really
not,
weird. It's
not too
like
involved. Not a cat.
I was gonna say, like, what is that crossover point? Like, what at what point is it not okay to dissect like a frog? Like, does anyone like no one dissects dogs? People are sketchy about cats, but it's okay to dissect a frog, right? It's okay to do that.
Yeah,
I don't know. I
yeah.
don't know what that
If
crossover
if
point
it's
is.
fuzzy and cuddly or
Yeah,
not, I'm
right.
not sure if that's the line that we have to watch out
Yeah.
for.
Um, but how? So your local high school, you did. You had a fondness for let's say STEM in general, right? Biology,
hmm
chemistry. I don't
hmm
know. And then you went off to Wisconsin Green Bay. How was, um, I never listen. I've never been up to like the Great Lake area, Michigan, Wisconsin, that Minneapolis or Minnesota, that whole area. Um, so how is Green Bay generally as a city? I mean, I assume, I don't know, if you're a big Packer fan. I assume you kind of have to. Um, but how's Green Bay as a city? Um, yeah.
Yeah, so definitely a big Packer fan growing up. My dad would go to sell programs on Sunday, and sometimes I would go with him and just walk around in the atrium area and still get to see the game, which was pretty exciting.
Mm.
And my sister has some season tickets, so whenever I'm back in town, I see if the Packers are in town, and be like, hey, can I go to the game? It was pretty exciting. But so the campus is actually, it's not in the center of Green Bay. It's a little bit off outside of the town. And so it's pretty rurally located. It's surrounded by a really beautiful arboretum, which is great for running. And so I
Okay.
ran cross country when I was in college also,
Okay.
and I was on the cross country team. And so I actually didn't go to Green Bay all that often.
Yeah.
My sister lives in Green Bay now, and so I visit there occasionally. We'll go downtown, check out all the Packer stuff, go to the local malls and things like that. But
Mm.
other than that, I haven't spent a ton of time in the town. But it's a small Midwestern town, very focused on the Packers. Like there's Packer paraphernalia everywhere, everybody's
Sure.
yard, Packer flags. And
Do you
game day
still?
is a pretty exciting time.
Yeah. Do you still? I assume you still run now. Like, I mean, do you? I feel like do you get like, some of your best ideas while you're out running?
Absolutely. Running is an incredible release from, I mean, anything, right? And any
Mm-hmm.
job. It's a really good time to get down to zero and just kind of run through your thoughts. I mean, sometimes you think about nothing. Other times I'm thinking about projects that are going on in the lab or dealing with a, personal situation. Running is definitely my outlet.
Do you run with music on, or do you run with podcasts, or are you like no music because that's cheating?
Yeah. So if I'm doing a really long run, like upwards of 10 miles, then I'll put on usually a book
Mm-hmm.
or a podcast. Um, just because that's a long time to just be alone with your thoughts. I have run long distances without anything, but generally, when you get to that really hard part of the run and you need some motivation, having music or something to listen to can sort of either distract you from the pain or motivate you.
Right.
Um,
Distract you
yeah.
from the pain is real. I listen to a lot of. I've been really here in Houston. It's hard to like get into. Like, I really want to get into hunting, especially when I'm out of graduate school. So I've been really listening to a lot of like long distance runners like Cameron Haynes, um, Courtney Daywalter, who's like an ultra marathon runner. I've listened to a lot of those kind of people. And listen, I'm never going to become an ultra marathon runner. But if I could do like 10 or 15 miles, I think that's pretty damn good. But it's hard to run right here. It's hard to run in Houston. Maybe I'm just making a lot of excuses. But I do want to get into like running someday. Like take it really seriously. It is really good for you. That and strength training, I think,
Mhm.
are especially good for like longevity. I think. So good for you with running. Have you done any marathons or anything like that? Like, are you training for something like that, or is it more so kind of like just to stay in general shape and just stay just good release, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. So I like to do races. I've
Mm-hmm.
ran competitively in high school and college, and so I'm pretty competitive. And so there's a local Princeton half marathon that I've done a few times. A really fun race, and it
Oh,
actually
fun.
runs right by the chemistry building. So that's usually in November. Sort of training for that one right now. I would love to do a marathon at some point. I think it's just eventually we'll work up, slowly working
Yeah,
up
we're
the
gonna.
distance.
I guess. Well, how do you like? How does your? Because if you're training, like, I mean, if you're running 10 miles, that has to. I don't know how long that takes. That's got to take an hour and a half. I don't know if I had to
Hmm.
guess. So how do
Yep.
you like? What does like your schedule look like then? I mean, do you like wake up, go running, and then you just do your chemistry day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I generally reserve the really long, time-consuming runs to the weekend.
Okay.
And so Saturday or Sunday morning will generally be my long run day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that way, right, if I'm going to go into work, it's going to be later in the day anyhow. And so I can
Right.
sort of run, recover, have a nice brunch, and then do whatever I'm going to
There
do
you
for the
go.
rest of the day. I mean, as if you're running a lot of mileage, then you have longer runs during the
Mm-hmm.
week as well. And so I'll get up at 5 or 5:30 and go out and try and get those done before going to work.
There
But
you go.
those sometimes make the workday pretty long. And I tend to sit quite a bit after that.
Well, the thing, something that I used to wake up at like 6 a.m. to go to the gym before like attending classes. I think I'm going to start doing it again once the fall semester starts up because I could shower at the rec center. But where was I going with that? That like it's early, but like after you're done that workout, you definitely feel like you can take on the day. And by habit, you definitely go to sleep earlier, which is nice. You can just wake up earlier. So initially, it definitely is difficult to like get that schedule going, but after about a week, it's certainly doable. And I find that I'm definitely like mentally clear and like motivated, if that makes sense. Like I don't actually think I'm more tired. I mean, when I'm approaching like 4 or 5 p.m., I'm like, okay, I'm out. I can't do this anymore. But that entire morning though, like I'm ready. Like I'm feeling pretty good. So
Yeah, I mean, I definitely noticed a difference in my academic performance in college. So cross country is only one semester where you're
right.
actually running, intensely training and doing competitive training and racing and things like that. And so during the fall, I would be incredibly tired, but I would be so focused, learn the time management skills, and then in the spring semester, right, I'd feel like we're still training, but it's not quite the same. You don't have the same
Right.
rigorous schedule, and you just get a little bit off track. And so I think I always recommend to my students, like, find some sort of exercise routine because it can really help you deal with stress and anxiety, and it's just really good for you.
It is. It's super important. And it's something about also like obviously like you're getting better physically, but it's really more important for the mental health. Like I really can't like you really need to um if you want to stay like I feel like mentally sharp, you have to have that physical release. Like it has to be done. So definitely, if you're a student, I mean this is for everyone really. Like definitely do
Right.
take on your make sure your physical health is good. It's but that's really cool. How did you like initially get into cross country? Was it just something to do when you were younger, or?
Yeah, so I went to a really tiny grade school, and I think in the spring, at the end of every year, we would have this local track meet, and so we would go to a local high school or middle school and just compete. We didn't train or anything. There was no. It was just, okay, we're going to go have a track meet today, and you're just going to go run. And I was not a runner up until that point. I mean, certainly as a kid, right, you're running around all the time, but I had never run any sort of long distance race, and I what was I think I was running the 400 meter, which is not long by any stretch of the imagination, but for a kid, I guess.
I mean, for
And I was
an elementary school
yeah,
kid, it's
I was running into back and not feeling great, and then it was like the last 100 meters, and I just took off and passed everybody, and then that just became my thing.
that was your first runner's high. There it was, and
Yeah,
you've
right.
always
It was
been
like, oh my
chasing
God,
that.
this is really fun, really competitive. Like I get to win, I get the blue ribbon, right? It's really exciting. And
There
so
you
the
go.
next year I did the 800, and then I think after that it was off to high school,
Yeah,
and the coach encouraged me to try out.
there you
So
go.
that's sort of how it started.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
look, well, keep it up. Running is great. I want to back to University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. Did you come in then as like a biochemistry, chemistry, biology major, or how did and did you do any like undergraduate research at the time or anything like that?
Yeah, so I was pre-med going into college. I chose a chemistry major, but the pre-med focus, like a human biology minor or something like that.
A
I
common
really wanted to go to
tactic.
medical school.
Yep,
Yeah,
common tactic.
yeah. I thought it was really clever, but yeah, I think it was a pretty common tactic. And so I really wanted to go to medical school. I was terrified, absolutely terrified to take organic chemistry. My sister had taken it, 7 years ahead of me, and she just hated it, right? It was just the worst class, like didn't like the professor, and horror stories of organic chemistry are untold, right? Like everybody knows. And so when I took the class, there was a brand new assistant professor starting. And so I was, one of her first students, and she just did an absolutely fantastic job teaching us and making it approachable. And I just fell in love with the subject. And then from there, I dropped the pre-med and started doing research in her lab. During the semesters, I worked in the chemistry stock room, so I would help set up the labs and things like that. And then I did an REU program at Georgia Tech between my last 2 years.
REU?
Working, a graduate research experience for MBA.
Oh, okay. That's really
So I
cool.
got to work. in a graduate research lab, right? See what it's actually like to be a grad student, work with a postdoc and things like
Mhm.
that. Because Green Bay is more of a PUI.
Right. I don't know what it is about like something about like organic chemistry is that weird subject where it's like it really is just like make or break cutoff. Like I don't know what it is. I remember because like I actually was originally chemical engineering, and I guess technically I still have a BS in chemical engineering. I'm a dual degree in chemical engineering and chemistry, but I guess like, my point is like I always remember like going into organic or that a few weeks leading up to it, and like the senior chemical engineers were like, dude, this class was so hard for me. And I was like, oh God, like here we go. Not looking forward to this. And I took it, and it was taught by who would then go on to become my undergraduate like advisor, and it was super fun. So I don't know what like I don't know why organic has this rep for being like I don't know what I genuinely don't know what it is. It's a lot of like I guess soon to be dental students or you know PT students, medical school students. They just so many of them just crash at that course. I don't know what it is. I don't know. Like obviously, like has something to do with like professor you get. I mean, you might get a bad hand and have a bad professor. That's certainly the case, but I don't know. I don't know what it is about that class that gets people so fumbled. Um,
Yeah, I
I
think
don't know.
it's the first class where I mean you can get through a lot of undergraduate education by memorizing the lecture
Yeah,
notes or textbook, right? And I think with organic, like that's just not the right strategy. And so when people have been used to that strategy of just trying to memorize everything instead of looking for the patterns and the applications, right? That's I think where it really becomes either a chore or you fall in love with it. So if you're
right.
more of a pattern recognizer and um, solve the puzzle, I think that's better than just trying to memorize all the reactions and just spit them out on an exam.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
So
I'll never.
I try and
I was
oh
I
sorry.
was I was just gonna mention like that's definitely a great point because I do remember like especially towards the end of the semester you start to learn, let's say reactions, and I remember even getting introduced to, like retrosynthesis like towards the end of the semester, and it was like, oh man, like, this is definitely like nothing anyone's ever seen before at the time. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I can see it if you're like in like let's say a 200 300 person course if you're at a big university. I mean, you really have to take it upon yourself to like actually do this stuff yourself. You know, um,
Hmm.
I think I think those are great points.
Yeah. I always try and stress this at the beginning of semester. I haven't taught a large lecture yet, but I've taught first semester organic, and
Mhm.
this class is very different than what you've taken before. Don't try and memorize it. Try and you know get into the material. Try and find the patterns and the understanding, and if you get the fundamentals, then you can apply it to anything.
Right,
And you may not use organic chemistry in the future directly, but the skills that you learn in that course, the problem solving, like all of that is applicable for anything in the future, right? Other
right.
courses, jobs, daily life. I don't know. I may be biased because I'm an organic chemist, but I think
Yeah,
organic
I hear you.
chemistry is definitely
No,
a base fundamental that can really set you up for success.
I definitely hear you. I think it really, I genuinely do believe it is the first class where like students really have to like step outside their comfort zone and like not memorize things. Like I think that really is the first, especially for STEM students, like at least, like that is the
Mm-hmm.
first one. And right. I mean, the thinking outside the box and not memorizing is a great tool for, especially if like a lot of these students, they want to go on to become, you know, PT, they want to go PT school, medical school, you know, whatever the case might be. Like, it, you know, you have to problem solve. That's really what it boils down to.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those are great points. So, but back to your undergraduate. So what did you do as an undergraduate research, and also how did you kind of approach it? Was your advisor like looking for students, or were you just like asking around? Like, how did you get into to doing the research?
Yeah, so my professor is the one who taught the organic chemistry course, and I also worked in the undergraduate, the lab setup,
Yep, yep.
facility, and so I think that got me connected with the professors pretty easily. I think if I remember correctly, it's been so long ago, but I think I just went in there and be like, "Hey, I really want to do research. I'm excited about organic chemistry." I mean, once I took OChem, like I switched from pre-med to chemistry, like that's what I wanted to do. I knew that, even though I hadn't done research yet. Um, and so
That's okay.
she was just setting up the lab, and so she had brand new equipment, and so we were working on a total synthesis. I forget the exact molecule, So I probably only accomplished like 3 or 4 actual reactions, like multiple times, but 3 or 4 actual different reactions throughout my years there. But it's still
That's
enough to
okay.
make you fall in love with it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't
I
know,
mean,
it's like cooking,
you're
but
at a, you're, that sounds like super fun. Like, I mean, I remember like my undergraduate research experience was like making like looking at functional group tolerance of like acetylcholine esterase inhibitors, like total synthesis. I mean, I guess in some ways it was kind of a total synthesis, but like, yeah, I was like 19, 20. I had no idea what was going on. I was just kind of doing the science, it's just like, that's
yep,
all it was.
yep,
And, I also came from a, PUI. So it wasn't really about like it wasn't necessarily about like, do you understand everything that's going on right now? It was just like, just have fun doing the chemistry and things will come, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I think that's a really good perspective.
Um, so you're doing some undergraduate research. How did you get the opportunity to do the REU at Georgia Tech, right? Or is it University of Georgia or Georgia Tech?
Georgia Tech.
Georgia Tech.
So I
Okay.
just applied to a bunch of the different programs that were going on across the country. I forget
Hmm.
exactly how I came across it. I've just been looking for research experiences for the summer, or maybe my professor mentioned it. So I applied to a number of them, and I guess I really wanted to go to Atlanta. It sounded like a cool experience. I don't think I got to choose a professor ahead of time. So you go there and then they match you up based on your research interests. Um, in Atlanta for 2 months in the summer sounded like a pretty cool experience.
That sounds,
So I was
yeah,
fortunate enough to, yeah, to have the qualifications to get accepted to one of these programs. And then,
yeah, that's super cool. A little summer stay in a different city. I mean,
hmm
a lot of growing up in that time, I'm sure, but it was I don't know,
yeah, especially for a girl from a very small farm town.
growing
That
up in
was my
Atlanta,
first,
going
yeah,
to
big
Atlanta, the
experience on my own.
huge rap scene there. Um,
Yep.
that yeah, that must have been not. I don't think wake up call is the right word, but it's like it must have been like a total like just I mean total culture shock. I mean, well then again, I mean if you're from a small town in the Midwest, I'm sure anywhere, any big city is going to be a big change up. But was that the first time you had like left the Midwest? Like maybe you done vacationing, but like I don't know if like that was like the very first time you'd like really left.
That was the first time I had left for
Yeah.
longer than a few days. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. Yep. On my own. That was,
Did
yeah.
you stay on the I assume you just stayed on the campus then.
Yeah, they have campus
Okay.
housing.
I never I never forget when I did summer research. Like some of my best memories were like I was like staying in the dorm over the summer, and I was like research during the week and like hanging out during the weekends. Like I had so much fun. Like I was
hmm
like 1920. It was super fun. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
They have a lot
That's
of
really
programming too. Like we went to
yeah.
the aquarium, we went to the Coca-Cola Museum, we went to like baseball games, and they have professional development, heavy duty talks and things like
Right.
that. So
That's
it's
super
a really
cool.
good experience.
Yeah.
Highly recommend it for all undergraduate researchers out there.
Yeah. So at what point then did you like really consider going to graduate school? Because I also know you had a bit of, let's say, unorthodox kind of like graduate school experience because you went to graduate school, you kind of left to go to industry, and then you came back. So it's definitely a
hmm
bit of an unorthodox. I'd love to talk to you about that. Um, Kind of the decisions leading
Yeah.
up to why you left, but also coming back too. Um,
Yeah.
but maybe we could definitely start with
So
initially going to graduate school, I guess.
yeah, so initially going to graduate school, I don't know if it's just so long ago, but I don't really remember exactly how I came to the programs that I did. I applied across the United States. I wanted to stay pretty close to home, and so I was really excited to go to Wisconsin. And I applied to Minnesota and Illinois, and then randomly I just applied to Colorado State. I've always wanted to go to Colorado. So I was looking through the website, like, oh, this research looks pretty cool. Like, there's a number of professors there. And I went on the visit weekend to CSU and just loved the cohort who was coming in, loved the existing students, the faculty. There was a new professor starting, and it was just, and Fort Collins is incredible. Like, if you haven't been to Fort Collins, it's incredible.
I've only been to
Love that place.
Colorado Springs, but
Also amazing.
yeah, Colorado is definitely a. I think it's underrated. I don't know if enough people know about Colorado, honestly.
Okay,
Maybe.
actually, I take that back. Colorado sucks. Don't go there. Let's keep it quiet.
Yeah, I don't want people
We
going
don't want
there.
too many people going.
Um,
But yeah, so I was deciding between Wisconsin and CSU, and CSU just felt like the better fit for me.
Yeah.
professionally and personally. And so I ended up going there for grad school. I mean, the people you meet in your cohort, right? They're going to be your best friends for
Right.
the rest of your life. It was just an incredible time. I mean, I guess most people probably think their graduate school experience is the most incredible time. It was just, CSU was a really special place
Yeah.
in that first period, 2008 to 2011 when I was there. I think, I came from a really small school, PUI. I did that summer of research, but I don't think when I went to graduate school, I knew why I was going. I
Mm.
just thought like, okay, the next step is getting a PhD and then I'll figure it out from there.
Right.
And I think for me, like I just wasn't quite ready to get through the entire PhD program without knowing what I wanted to do afterwards. And so I really just needed perspective.
Right.
And so that's why I ended up leaving the program with the master's degree. Like I had gone through candidacy and all that. I got to this stage in my third year. And I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And so I was just like, all right, I want to see if I want to pursue other things. I actually thought about veterinary school for a while. So I worked at a veterinary hospital for almost
Yeah.
a year because I loved working with animals, right? Growing up on a farm, my
Fair
interest
enough.
in medicine.
Yeah, it's really interesting,
then,
especially like, you got to the third year and you were like, screw this, I'm out.
yeah,
You didn't really know.
right?
I think that's like, I think that's really, I wonder, I wonder how many students across like the nation are actually like, surely there's a lot of them who are like in the same position. You're just like, when am I here? But I kind of
Yeah.
had like the opposite where it was like, I was like towards the end of my senior year of like undergrad. And I was like, well, I don't really want to go to industry yet. So I guess maybe I was in the same position as you. I don't know. Or I was like, yeah, at the end of undergrad, I don't really want to go to industry yet. So I guess graduate school is the next appropriate step, I guess. So luckily it worked out for me, but that's really interesting. You were like, I mean, sure, you didn't like stay in for this next like 2 years to get it done, no?
Yeah. I mean, I guess my thought was if I don't know why I'm here, then maybe getting a PhD isn't the right decision
Mm,
for me right now. And, I think if you get a PhD and you don't know what to do with it at the end, like that can be a really challenging situation, right? Because you don't really know what job you want. And sometimes a PhD could actually be a burden if that's not the sort of position that you want,
right.
right? It's harder to get jobs with the PhD credentials
Mm,
if that's not the level that you're looking for. And I didn't know. I didn't know if I wanted to teach. I didn't know if I wanted to work in industry. I didn't know if I wanted to have the PhD level of responsibility. I was
right.
just sort of lost. And I'm just like, all right, I'm not like, if I change my mind, if I have, which I obviously did, have an experience that pushes me back, I can always come back and finish it. But
Yeah.
right now, it just doesn't feel like the right path.
Yeah. That's definitely a very unique and good perspective. I think because a lot of students may be feeling the same as you, where it's like, I don't really know. And it is okay to like leave and come back. Like there's like,
Mm-hmm.
people are so afraid to just like leave graduate school like once they've committed to it. They feel like they've like letting everyone down. Like, but it's like at the end of the day, like I mean, most people that I've come across don't really care. Like, it's like you got to do what's best for you. So it's like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I definitely hear you there. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
You're kind of open about that and sharing that because I think that's a lot of students are good to hear that. It's like it's okay to
Yeah.
leave.
I feel like it is okay to leave, right? I feel like there's a stigma of failure around it if you choose to leave with a master's degree before finishing. But I don't know, like if it's not the right path for you, that's a much worse decision to make than leaving. You can always come back.
Mm-hmm.
There's always opportunities for you to come back if you're successful. So
Mm-hmm. So
sometimes it's just good to get perspective.
after well, if you're okay, I'd love to hear about like the conversation you had with your advisor. Then, like, was he or she like, are you sure, or like, was he supportive? He or she supportive? I don't know.
Yeah, he was supportive. He was really supportive. I think he was disappointed
Fair enough.
because I think I was doing still pretty well in the program. We had our first paper in revisions or in review, and but I don't know why I'm here, and I want to pursue other things and see if if those are a better path for me. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think if a student comes to tell you that, the best thing you can do is be supportive. I mean,
Right.
I guess try and talk through the issues and make sure it's not something that would be easily solvable.
Right.
But in this case, I was pretty decided that I can't do this right now. I
Yeah.
need to take a
Fair
step
enough.
back and pursue something else.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So on your journey doing other things, like what, I mean, I assume you picked up other jobs, but at what point were you kind of ready to come back then? But I'm kind of curious also
hmm
about hearing too.
Yeah, so I had done the vet hospital thing or worked as a veterinary assistant. I mean, I loved working with animals, but the emotional toll that that job can take on you
Where
is
was that, by the way? Did you move back to Wisconsin, or where was that at?
no. So my partner at the time was still finishing his PhD at CSU, and so
Okay,
I was
okay,
looking for jobs in Fort Collins, and so this was in Greeley, which is just a town a little ways away
okay.
from Fort Collins.
Yep.
So I had applied with absolutely no experience in veterinary medicine, and they took a flyer on me and hired me, which was a
But they saw
shock
you took
in
organics, so they
hindsight.
hired you on the
But
spot.
right,
That must have been it.
master's degree in organic chemistry. Well, that's not going to
Yeah.
help you here, but it does a little bit. You learn how to solve problems, and like I actually knew like the structure of the drugs and things like that. I don't know if it's really valuable because I'm not prescribing medicine, but
Plus, growing
at
up at
least
a
I
dairy
knew what
farm,
was
I'm
going
sure
on.
helped a lot. I'm sure that helped tremendously working with
Yeah,
animals. But
yeah, and
I mean,
it was great times.
yeah.
But when someone brings in their sick animal and you have to
I
give
was
them
gonna.
the bad news, and then
I feel like
help
working in
put them
hospitals really
down,
can
it's just
be, yeah. Working in, I feel, yeah, working in hospitals and veterinary hospitals. I mean, you really do get the highs of highs, right? You see
hmm
newborns, you see, I don't know, people beating cancer, animals beating
yep,
cancer, but then it's like the low of lows though too. So,
yeah, yeah. There was one time I forget what kind of a I think it was a Chihuahua. She came in, was having trouble birthing her puppies, and they had to do C-section to help with the delivery. And one of the puppies came out not breathing, and so I
oh
was
Jesus,
doing, like in 101 Dalmatians where they do the little thing
I actually never
to
saw
try
that
and get
movie,
the heart
but
beating.
okay.
Yeah, so I was doing that, like rubbing it really quickly to try and get the heart going, and then it came to life, and it was like, oh my
Wow.
god, this is the most incredible experience! I just saved a little puppy. Oh my god,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
So definitely the highs, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
You didn't have to put down the dogs yourself though, no? Is it someone else had to do that or?
No, but I would assist,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So you would help, like put in the IVs and be with the
Yeah.
family.
Yeah. Okay. I had
Yeah, so that's
I
tough.
my I used to have a golden doodle. His name was Flynn, and he was 6, but he had inoperable bladder cancer. So he was he had inoperable bladder cancer. We had to put him down, and that was like, man, that was one of the. I mean, that was a hard day, and I still like. It's like, man, that was hard to see.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
so it definitely. I'm sure after like one was enough for me, but I'm sure after a few of them, it's like you can't even do this anymore. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
So that sort of told me that maybe vet medicine or medicine in general is definitely not like I love the science behind it. I love working with the patients, but
right.
for me personally, that emotional toll, I don't think I can handle that.
Hmm. I hear you there. Um, but after that, then, so was it another job then, or did you like go um, back to
Yeah.
graduate
So
school?
after that, I also CSU had a summer class opening
Hmm.
for an instructor, and so I taught a summer class while I was working at the vet hospital, and then I found a job in Fort Collins that was working at a generic pharmaceutical in the quality control. I've had a lot of different jobs. And so I worked as a quality control analyst for a little over a year, just doing standard analytical techniques to test the APIs, residuals, things like that,
Hmm.
HPLC assays, what have you.
HPLC.
So following procedures, right? Like there's not a lot of R&D there, but it was still a good job to get back into chemistry.
Sure.
But it wasn't until I moved to California. My husband got a postdoc position at Caltech, and so I was moving to California with him. So I was looking for jobs, and I got contacted by a recruiter for this company called HRL Labs. It's formerly Hughes Research Laboratory, so Howard Hughes Aviation, and it's located in Malibu, California,
Fancy.
which, right, is located actually on one of the cliffs, and so you can oversee the ocean if you have the right office, which I did by the end.
I'm sure
It's
you
very
had
exciting. Or,
great runs in Malibu. I'm sure.
yeah, yeah, that was incredible. So there, I was basically a materials engineer, and so
Mhm.
I was working with polymers and composite materials to make for applications in aerospace and automotive. So I was, right now the company, at least when I was there, was owned by Boeing and General Motors, and so they have a lot of contracts with them to develop parts for cars and planes and things like
It's a good day when you're working for Boeing. I'll tell you that much.
that. Yeah. And so, my feeling there was this place, it has the contracts with GM and Boeing and government contracts and things like that, but it feels a little bit more like a national lab, which is a
Mm,
little bit more like there was more of an academic feel to it, I guess.
sure.
Like you could start your own projects, you could apply for seed funding and things like that. And so it was that experience. They ended up making me like the project manager. I had a supervisor above me, but they kept promoting me and giving me all these responsibilities in project management and working with the folks from Boeing and General Motors, and I just loved that. Right? It really re-inspired my love for research, and I realized at that point that I had a cap on what I could accomplish
Mm,
with just a master's degree, right? And so if
right.
I wanted to get the top job to actually be a project manager, I would need to get a PhD. And so it was at that point, like my love for science and research was reinvigorated. I had incredible mentors who were supportive, and they basically encouraged me to go back and finish my PhD.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's a good point where it's like you kind of need to take a step back in order to go forward. Where it's like you need to kind of find that, because a lot of students get burned out. That generally does happen. You need
Mm-hmm.
time away to like, I guess to reappreciate things like that just
Mm-hmm.
happens. So that's really
Yep,
cool.
absolutely.
That literally happened to you. Um,
Yeah.
so reapplying into graduate schools, I know you worked with Professor Abby Doyle. So I don't know, was she at Princeton at the time, or did she move to UC? I don't remember exactly the timeline, but
So she was at Princeton. So when I was considering going back to finish my PhD, I thought the easiest thing would be to re-enroll at Colorado State.
mm,
I kept in touch with Tom Rovis, who was um, not my mentor previously, but he was my committee chair, I think, for my candidacy exam and things like that. So I had a good relationship with Tom. And so I reached out to him like, hey, I'd love to come back and finish my PhD. And he sort of helped get the ball rolling for getting readmitted and back into the program. Like everything I had accomplished thus far counted.
oh,
Right?
there you
So
go.
candidacy, I had done my third year seminar, all the classes, and
That's super nice.
cumulative exams and all those things. So it was basically just coming back to finish research and write a dissertation. But at the same time, my husband got a job in New Jersey at Princeton, and Princeton basically worked it out so that I could do my research here, which is, I guess, is where I currently am, right? That I could do my research here
It all
with
comes full
Abby
circle, right?
while still getting my degree from Colorado State. So basically, I was a visiting student here at Princeton. And then Tom ended up moving to Columbia midway through my PhD.
Yeah,
So then I could go and visit him at Columbia really easily. And I would just go back to CSU to do my proposal and then final dissertation talk.
there you go. That
So
is.
it's a little convoluted. There's a lot of
I
moving
was gonna
parts,
say this is
institutions
definitely
and
not.
professors and advisors, but
This is not an orthodox approach to getting your PhD, but it
no,
worked out
it's
in the
not.
end.
But
Very
yeah.
unique experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. So what, I guess kind of those final 2 years, and what were you working on as a graduate student? Like kind of what was your project?
Yeah, so I had done CH functionalization chemistry during my master's, since I had some experience with transition metal catalysis, organic synthesis. I love doing method development. And so when I came here, I mean, this was really when like nickel and photoredox catalysis was becoming a big thing, right? Blue lights shining in Frick all night long, all day long. And so I was really excited to get into the photochemistry aspects. Some of my projects that I'd worked on at HRL, I wanted to develop new materials. And I thought one of the ways we could do that was with using these new advances in photochemistry and photocatalysis. And so I was really excited to get that training. And it needed to be a collaborative project between Tom and Abby. And so we came up with, a dual nickel photoredox and then some of Tom's old chemistry, desymmetrizing anhydrides with new nucleophiles. That was the first project I worked on. It was a really nice combination. There were two research programs
Mm,
to revise the anhydride chemistry, do some asymmetric. And then, that was one of my projects. And then the other one was actually came out of my proposal for my fourth year talk at CSU. I was really interested in some of Alex Radosiewicz's chemistry, like what he was doing with phosphines, just the new advances in that area. So I started doing some reading and developed this phosphine radical cation chemistry where you could activate strong bonds like carbon oxygen bonds or other strong bonds and generate radicals that way. And so that was my second project that I was finishing up as I was leaving here. Yeah.
There you go. That's super exciting stuff.
Yeah.
I think, so how then, at what point then did you like want to become a professor then? Was that like really, like at what point then you didn't, because I mean, I don't know, obviously you were in industry, so maybe you didn't want to go back to that, or like at what point you were like, I actually want to be a professor now?
Yeah, so that was the interesting thing about my industry experience. I loved, like, it re-inspired my love for research, and I really liked being able to work on projects that would directly impact society, right? I mean, you may not think about it, but when you're making parts for an airplane to like lower the cost or weight or whatever, right, that's going to impact people's bottom line. And so seeing that direct application of my research to society was really cool. And I loved working with materials as well, because I think there's just so much opportunity for materials to influence people's daily lives, right? Like pharma and certainly developing drugs and all that also too is incredible. But for me, I was really interested in materials aspects, like the tangible nature.
Right.
You'll go to talks from polymer chemists and they'll bring in props, right? They'll bring in stretchy polymers or things like that, show how the properties change based on some, microstructure change. I just thought that was so cool to bring that to people. It was an area of research that I wanted to get into. And, working in industry, the exciting part is bringing something that actually could come to market, but you're also very restricted in the kind of research you can do, right? It has to be fast, it has to be cheap, and you can't always explore it fully in sort of the academic way, right?
Right.
So I thought that, if I really want to do my own research and run my own projects, like academia would really be the space to do that. And that teaching experience that I had at CSU, like I loved teaching undergrads, especially organic chemistry, first semester, like having that influence on them that I had when I was taking the class, right? Like being able to do that and change people's perspectives. I thought it was just a really cool challenge and opportunity to influence the next generation of scientists.
Right.
So those sort of two loves dovetail really nicely into being a professor.
Just on that real quick, I love talking about kind of like advice and pedagogy with different professors. Like what are some of the, like when you go in to teach organic chemistry, do you teach any graduate courses at all, or do you just teach undergraduates right now? Do you both?
Yeah, I teach polymer chemistry for graduate students.
Okay. So both, let's say, maybe it's kind of two separate questions then, for graduate students versus the undergraduates. What's kind of like the advice you kind of, when students first come in, like what's some of the things that, you're really looking for, and, what are really the key takeaways for students to come away with your courses, you think?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely different motivations. So for the graduate students or the graduate class, I mean, there will be some upper level undergraduates there as well who are looking to go to grad school. So they're looking for that grad student experience. And so, for that class, I think it's a little bit more casual. It's a little bit more conversational, right? We're going to get through the material that we get through, but if it, diverges into different topics and exploring other things, like I think that's really valuable, right? You want it to be more of a discussion about science, do some fundamental training, but not have it be too structured. And so I think over my years of teaching it so far, I've been trying to make it a little bit less structured and trying to make it a little bit more conversational. And they'll do presentations and things like that. And so I guess what I want them to come out of the class with is an appreciation for polymer science, like being able to recognize some of the different classes, how they might be synthesized. And if they're actually going into polymer research, then obviously having a much deeper understanding. But thinking critically.
Yeah, I hear you there. What about for like undergrads though?
Yeah, for the undergrads, right? That's a very different class. And so I've been teaching the honors first semester organic, which means it's oftentimes first year undergrads in their spring semester. And so they're taking an accelerated version of it.
Okay.
So they've had one semester of undergraduate and then they're coming into organic chemistry. So that's pretty intense. Yeah. So it's a smaller class, so it's a little bit more intimate setting. And I've been, dabbling with a few different techniques. I mean, I do the standard lecturing, but I try and also keep it pretty conversational so they can ask questions and get involved with the material. I try and bring in very modern either applications or instances of how the chemistry is being used. And so,
Mm,
for polymer chemistry, that's really easy. We do the polymer lecture, right? I can bring in different samples and things like that
right.
and show them. And, we work on some polymer degradation research. And so when we're talking about radicals, I can kind of bring that in at that point. Say like, hey, this is the research that we're working on. So it's not just, all the meat and potatoes reactions that they need to learn, but also seeing like, oh, this is what people are actually doing with this right
Right.
now. And like, St. Patrick's Day, I drew up the structures of different
Great
dyes
holiday.
that people, right, they dye the beer or the water, right, and just showing them all these different structures and somehow tie it back into the chemistry. And then, so I don't do a flipped classroom. What I was doing instead is I turned office hours sort of into that flipped classroom. And so I
Okay.
lectured during the class periods, and then during office hours, I would just give them problem sets and I would just have them go to the board and work through them. So it's a little bit more of like a graduate style teaching, but I think they loved it. Like it really gave them a better appreciation, like understanding that this is what you should be doing to understand the material, not just looking through the notes, but actually working through problems, doing them yourself at the board, with someone to help you and guide you if you need it. But it's the struggling is the learning, right? Like I think people struggle and they're like, oh no, this is too hard, I can't do it. But that's what you want. That's when you're learning things.
Right. You want to
So
be
I try
stumped.
to,
You want to
yeah,
be stumped. It will
yep,
happen.
yep.
That's really cool. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because I think, I mean, definitely want to change the chemistry culture about pedagogy. With and hopefully, people can appreciate organic chemistry more. I think, and that's kind of we do that by sharing what we all do, and what makes it good. Um, but
Yep.
what I was kind of most excited for to hear from you today was about your research we're doing here today. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because I mean, in general, like you mentioned, you kind of are a lot of polymer chemistry and even degradation. So I'm really excited because, look, you know, um, I'm in Professor Brad Carr's group who partly does polymer chemistry, but I'm not a polymer chemist. So I'm more of an organic metallic chemist. So what I'm kind of most, what I'm really interested in hearing from you is like depolymerization, actually, because I feel like that's a problem. That's obviously a problem that a lot of people, especially like non-scientists and even like myself, like I don't really know how to deal with it. And so maybe we could start with like, um, what, why is it hard to, let's say, recycle polymers? Like we could start there, and maybe the different strategies that's currently out there, and maybe the approaches that you're starting to take to start this depolymerization um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah. And so I think, part of our research and part of our, federal grant money is to try and educate the public a little bit more about what plastics are, why they're so beneficial, and why we don't want to just stop producing them, right? I think
Right.
there's a lot of value to plastics. And I think people, there's been a few,
It's like a catch-all, right? It's
maybe
like, oh, no plastics, but I don't think people really understand what that means, though.
what that
Right.
means, right? Like life would be so dramatically different. Like we are so dependent on plastics, polymers, right? I'm going to use those words pretty much interchangeably. Um, like you can't go a few seconds without touching some piece of plastic or polymer, right? A lot of our clothing is made out of polymers. I was saying there was a New York Times article, God, 6 months back or even longer, I don't remember, where someone went an entire day without touching synthetic polymers.
Okay.
And like
Did
the,
he
the
like not
lengths that
leave
they
his
had to
room?
go through to do it was insane, right? They couldn't have their phone, they couldn't have any sort of technology. Like it was completely insane what they had to do to accomplish that. And it was just, I think it was pretty eye opening,
Right.
how dependent we are on these materials. And again, it's good, right? It's really enabled our society, all of our technology. But I think the challenge is that everyone's really excited when they throw their plastics in the recycling bin, right? The blue recycling bin. Oh, it's going off. It's going to be reused and or made into a new water bottle, right? That's generally not what happens. We recycle less than 10% of all the commercial plastics that are produced. And when you're producing, billions and billions of water bottles every day, like just think of the volume, right? There's pictures out there of how much plastic is produced every single day, and it's staggering. It has to go somewhere, right? And if it's not being recycled, it's not being reused, it's ending up in landfills, in the ocean.
To be honest, it's for me, it's like out of sight, out of mind. I'd rather not know about the problem. It's because it really is
Yeah.
a staggering problem, but it's just so important, though. I don't know. Like,
It's so
but
important, right? And you can start limiting, you can try and reuse things as much as possible, but at the end of the day, I think we have to develop. We're not going away from plastic, right? There's just no way society can come back from it, and so we have to develop strategies to recycle the materials that we're making, and million metric ton scale. And so that's really what our research is trying to do from a number of different perspectives. And so I guess the strategies that are out there, right? So when you do throw it into the recycling bin, depending on your area, they'll recycle different materials. So PET, or you see those little triangles on the bottom of your plastic material, right? So
yep.
those are resin identification codes. And so they tell you essentially what is the major component of those materials. And so PET is number one, polyethylene terephthalate. And so this polymer is actually pretty well recycled. There's really good chemical recycling and mechanical recycling strategies for it. And so most often, if you see number one, like you throw that in the recycling bin, there's a good chance it's going to get recycled. And then polyethylene, polypropylene, like these are the two most commonly produced plastics. They'll be the number 2, number 4, and number 5.
I was going to say 2 and 4. Codes. I know, like low density polyethylene, yeah, right? High density polyethylene. Those are the ones that we, those are the bad ones.
Yeah.
Bad ones.
Yep. Yeah.
They're not easy ones to recycle.
Not easy ones to recycle. I mean, mechanical recycling. So mechanical recycling is a great strategy. So basically, what you do, you send the plastic material into the recycling center. It gets sorted through a number of different techniques. You clean it, you rinse it, and then you can chop it up into little pieces, and then you can basically turn it back into the pellets that it was originally and reformulate it into a new product. And in that way, you can generally get comparable material. And so you can repurpose it into another, jug or something like that.
Okay.
The challenge is when you can't separate the materials. Like polyethylene and polypropylene, very similar in terms of density, and they use a lot of IR cameras to sort out the different plastics, right? You're not going to tell the difference between polypropylene and polyethylene with IR. And so if those two get mixed, even though they're so structurally similar, you can't compatibilize them as is. And you'll just get a downgraded low value material, which you can do, right? You can turn it into like a park bench or, some baseboard or something like that, but that's going to be a single use, and then it's
that's something. After that. Yeah, that's even something I don't really quite understand. Like, if you're recycling them, what does it matter that they're not like? What does it matter that you? That's something it's not really clear to me. It's like if you're recycling them using these, like, what does it matter? You can't that they're not structurally the same. Like, what does that even matter?
Yeah, so polymers are, they're made up of these repeating units like ethylene, propylene, things like that, right? And so the monomers have different properties. And then once you incorporate them into the polymer, that gives it a new property. And depending on the chain length and things like that, right, you get different material properties. And so ethylene and propylene differ by one methyl group, right?
Mm-hmm.
So structurally very similar. You would think they'd behave pretty similar. And trying to separate them, I think, is probably pretty challenging, like propylene and ethylene on their own. But once you polymerize them, that one methyl group in the repeat unit, they won't mix together. They'll macrophase separate. And so if you melt them down together, they don't make like a single material. They separate, and so then you don't get the properties of either.
Oh, okay. So I guess the way I envisioned it then, like, let's say like you couldn't like mix like polypropylene, polyethylene. You couldn't depolymerize them. Well, I guess you could, but then the problem is once they're depolymerized, you can't separate the monomers. That's really...
So the depolymerization is a whole other issue with those two. This is just mechanical recycling for those two polymers.
Okay. Okay.
So even mechanical recycling, which is the easiest one that we can do, is probably the most common method for recycling right now. If you get mixtures of polyethylene and polypropylene, it's really hard to separate them. And
so you couldn't even like
together, you get a low value material.
So you couldn't like, let's say you took like a couple of jugs of polypropylene, a couple of jugs like polyethylene. You couldn't mechanically like depolymerize them, or you could, but then I guess I'm still not really following where the issue is then.
Yeah, you can chop both of those up together. Mm-hmm. And then when you try and formulate it, right, when you try and extrude it or something like that, the two polymers don't phase mix. So it's almost like oil and water in a way. They
Oh,
macrophase separate. And so then you just get, these macrophase separations, which doesn't give you the properties of either polyethylene or polypropylene. It's a really brittle
oh,
material. It'll break really easily. It
okay.
doesn't have the properties of either polymer. So there are ways to compatibilize it. I'll put a plug in for Jeff Coates at Cornell, my former colleague. They did some really beautiful work, and other people have done this too, but making block copolymers of polyethylene and polypropylene. And so then if you mix that in, it can compatibilize the two different phases, and then you won't get that macrophase separation, and you get a
Okay.
really high value material.
But you
So that's really
couldn't,
cool work.
so you couldn't, like, let's say you wanted to depolymerize, so you're depolymerizing polyethylene, polypropylene. You couldn't, like, there is, like, I generally don't know. Like, you couldn't just separate out the monomer polypropylene from polyethylene. You couldn't just do that.
So actually depolymerizing them back to monomer is incredibly challenging.
Okay. Okay.
And
Okay.
so the techniques that are out there right now for polyethylene and polypropylene, I think polyethylene, the most you can get back, maybe 10% monomer.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of it's going to be oligomers, cross-linked mess, things like that. Propylene's a little bit better, but rather than unzipping, it'll undergo side reactions
Okay. Okay.
because it's so thermodynamically downhill. The enthalpy of forming those polymers is so downhill that it's really hard to get back over.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
something that isn't really good for humans, but at the end of the day, these polymers are just carbon and hydrogen. So the Earth doesn't really necessarily care. All these plastic can just accumulate in the ocean. The Earth won't care. It'll just millions of years. The Earth will still be here. Humans probably won't. So it's okay for the Earth. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really matter. So I wouldn't really feel
Yeah.
necessarily bad for the Earth because it'll just the Earth will be fine. But humans will not be
Yeah.
fine in a million years. But
No.
it's the way it goes.
Well, yeah. But I think it can be a little deflating, right? Like having this massive problem. You're making millions of metric tons of polymer that we depend on, but then it's also just kind of wasteful to throw it away. But that's what's economically feasible. It's so cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, it's relatively cheap to make polymers, so it's just easier to throw them away than try and fix the problem. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, as an academic and as a scientist, like I think it's a really exciting challenge.
Right.
Ignore the impact on society. Just the challenge of trying to degrade these materials or depolymerize them it's so hard. So I like challenges.
It's great for funding.
Really tough
we can
challenges.
we can
Yeah, it's great for funding.
depolymerize your polymers. It's great for funding.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dive into this a little bit. So what are the kind of approaches that you group kind of takes into to trying to solve this issue? Like what do you guys try to think about?
Yeah, so I'm trained fundamentally as a synthetic organic chemist, and I like to use that approach in our research, right? Like for me, like we're working with really big molecules, but it's still the same fundamental reactions that we think happen in small molecules. And so, there's a lot of different ways to approach this problem. One strategy is to make more degradable polymers, either biodegradable, photodegradable. If they get out into the environment, they can break down maybe into their monomers or other non-hazardous components. And so we do that a little bit. We have a program for making degradable polymers and try and make them more infinitely recyclable, I guess, in how we're designing the materials. So that's one project that we're working on. But I think, what keeps me up at night is really the millions of metric tons of plastic that we're producing, right? Like polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene, PVC, like these are all really challenging polymers that we don't have necessarily good recycling strategies for. And so we are tackling that head on. We're looking at some of these commercial polymers. A lot of our research actually uses commercial materials. So I think we started posting up signs around the building, like bring your polymer waste to us and we're going to use it in our chemistry. Right, rather than making new polymer, we can use existing materials.
Just a quick aside on that, like something I was
1 gram at a time.
Just a quick aside on that. I'll get back to it. Is like I like in the chemistry lab as I'm thinking about these problems, like all the syringes that I have, all the plastic that comes in these syringes, all the cabinets that we have. I was like, oh my god, there's so much plastic here. You can't escape it. You can't escape it.
Nope.
All that single-use plastic. I don't know.
Using that single-use plastic to try and develop recycling strategies.
Right. No, sorry.
You gotta do what you can.
Yeah, right.
No, I don't. I try not to think about that sometimes. But
no, but go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's
right. Yeah, so we are coming at this from two different strategies. So, I think there's not one wholesale approach
Sure.
for all plastics and not even for a single plastic, right? There's different strategies that we can use to recycle these. Like mechanical recycling is one, but we need chemical recycling, either returning it to monomer, which would give you a completely closed loop life cycle, right? You polymerize it, you depolymerize it, and then you can keep repolymerizing those monomers and continually get virgin materials. The other strategy that we use is degradation of the polymer to valuable commodity chemicals. So it's a different valorization strategy, and also a different product stream, right? So a lot of our, commodity chemicals come from the oil industry. Can we start to repurpose this polymer waste and basically replace the oil in some way? And so actually this work just got funded by the DOE. It just got announced yesterday, so that's very exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You also had a paper that came out, I think yesterday actually, so congratulations on that too.
Yep.
ACS catalysis, check it out.
Yep. Yeah, that's our second paper on polystyrene degradation. And so what we've shown is that we can use different hydrogen atom abstraction agents to select different bonds in the backbone of polystyrene. And in that way, we can change the products that we're getting out. So we can start breaking down that polystyrene into commodity chemicals that are used as food additives or fragrances, or other just commodity chemicals that we use for other purposes.
What, for people that don't know, like what is polystyrene? Like what are some common plastics made of polystyrene? Like I don't.
Yeah, so polystyrene is number 6. The most common iteration of this is probably going to be styrofoam.
Okay.
So when you get your packages, we have tons of styrofoam in the lab. That's one of the things, moving down here, right? We're ordering a lot of things. And so now we get a lot of styrofoam that we can then use in our research, which is great. And it also actually fills 1/3 of the world's landfills. Because styrofoam is basically, so one way to think about polystyrene, it can take on a lot of different forms. The other one, very common one, will be coffee cup lids. So your Starbucks coffee cup lids are oftentimes polystyrene. CD cases and things like that are also polystyrene. And so on the one hand, you have this hard plastic, and the other hand, you have this soft, squishy sort of styrofoam. And the difference between them is that one is sort of like whipping up egg whites, right, to make a meringue. You just put a ton of air in there, and you get this very light, fluffy material. That's styrofoam. And then the other one would be making like a fried egg, right? Instead of whipping up that egg white, you just fry it in a pan, and then you get this, like hard plastic material. So that's sort of the different.
What a great analogy.
Ways polystyrene can be used. Yeah. That's why polystyrene takes up so much space. It's because it's a lot of it's air, but by volume, it actually takes up quite a bit of room.
Okay.
So we try and use our process for all these different types of commercial post-consumer waste. I drink a lot of coffee, and I try not to take coffee cup lids if I don't need to, but we use them in our research. Red Solo cups, those are another one. They're usually made of polystyrene.
That's a huge one. I had a lot of those in my fraternity days. Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of Red Solo cups. So convenient though, but it's really cool. So how does it? How does it work? Let's say chemically then. So do you literally take a coffee cup or a Red Solo cup, and what do you do with it? Like, how does it work?
Yeah. So right now we've started with a solvent mediated method where we put the polymer in a solvent and then add the catalyst. We use oxygen as our oxidant, and then we irradiate with light to start the hydrogen atom transfer process. We extract those. We start activating the backbone, it reacts with oxygen, and then it starts oxidatively cleaving the polymer. First into smaller chains, and then eventually it starts chewing up the chain ends into make these different products. And so depending on the catalyst you use and the conditions, you can start to change those products. You can either get benzoic acid, which is one that's used in fragrances, or something like acetophenone, which is a different.
Right. Both important. Definitely really important, like starting materials for a lot of different things. Super common. Yeah. How much in general, I'm curious to hear about kind of how this mechanism works. Like what is that entire process mechanistically? And also, have you noticed, how much of the, let's say the starting polymer gets retained, and how much are you able to get out? How much of the, let's say, desired depolymerized product are you able to get out?
Mhm. Yeah, so in our first paper, we were able to convert all of the polymer, essentially, either into smaller oxidized oligomers or
Hmm.
into the small molecules themselves. And then as we optimized the process a little bit further, we found that we could convert 50% of the polymer into benzoic acid.
Oh,
And
wow.
then the remainder of it is, I mean, there's some gas loss like CO or CO2, generate a little bit of formic acid, and then the mass balance is generally like oxidized trimers, tetramers, really small oligomers, which we're also looking at other purposes or other ways to repurpose these materials. Maybe using
Hmm.
them as initiators for a new polymerization or something like that, or other purposes.
Sure.
And so really what our focus is now, like 50% is great, right? Like, you know, you're turning it into something of value, whereas before it was pretty much
You have to
worthless.
start
But
somewhere.
exactly. And so now what we're trying to do is really dig into the mechanism, figure out exactly which CH bonds are being abstracted.
Hmm.
Do those radicals directly react with oxygen, or do they do chain fission and then react with oxygen? Like really trying to get into the nitty gritty details of the mechanism so that we can optimize the process further so that we can increase that number, much, much higher. So we can actually get each monomer unit converted into the small molecule.
Hmm. And have
So
you
that's one strategy.
any big takeaways yet, or is this kind of ongoing stuff in your lab?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely ongoing. I don't
Yeah,
want to give away all the details,
I
but
got you.
in the
I
paper that just
understand.
in the
I
paper that
understand.
just came out yesterday, we show that if you preferentially abstract one of the CH bonds over the other, you do start to change the product distribution. And so there's definitely it definitely shows that that process is
Right.
viable, right? That it really matters which CH bond you're abstracting, and then from there it's sort of controlling the downstream chemistry, which
Hmm.
we're
Well,
working on.
it's super exciting. I look forward to seeing what comes out of your lab over the next few months and really years, honestly. So it's going to be super exciting. But you also you also do other that's one strategy, right? Using I think I think you use iron and hydrogen atom transfer to do that stuff and solvent. But you also use quantum dots, I think, if I remember correctly. Um, I'm not going to pretend to understand what that means, but um, so I'll let you kind of take the reins on this a little bit too. That strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, so the work that I just talked about, that's our oxidative degradation. It's valorizing plastic waste into commodity chemicals, not into the monomers that initially form the polymer. And so this other strategy is called chemical recycling to monomer, and it's where you convert the polymer. Basically, you open up the backbone and you unzip it back into the original monomers. And in that way, you can continually repolymerize it and get virgin material. So it has all the properties that you want from a brand new material. So chemical recycling to monomer is going to be very dependent on the monomer itself, like how easy it is to polymerize. The easier it is to polymerize, the harder it is to depolymerize, right? Like driving that reaction in reverse is quite challenging.
Yep.
And so it takes a lot of energy. I mean, the reason that we have this plastics crisis is that, these materials are incredibly stable, right? They're, for all intents and purposes, largely inert to most of the conditions we expose them to, which
Right.
is great while you're using the plastic, right? You don't want your water bottle to start
Melting.
decomposing, or
Right.
you don't want your car to start falling apart, right? But the problem is, right, when they get out to the environment, then they persist for hundreds of years. And that's going to build up a lot of plastic waste. And so because they're so chemically inert, that's really where the challenge comes, to try and activate the backbone of the polymers. So in our previous work, we use hydrogen atom transfer, which is a common functional group to all these polymers, but it doesn't enable necessarily recycling back to the monomers. And so generally to do that, you have to put in a lot of energy to get over that hill, right? So all of these polymerizations are driven by forming really strong bonds, and so you have to give it a lot of energy to break those bonds in the reverse
Mm-hmm.
direction. So the way that people do this currently is through pyrolysis. So, right, you can take these polymers, you can heat them up to really high temperatures in excess of 400, 500 degrees Celsius, and then you can start to
Comfortable.
break the bonds of the backbone, right?
Right.
And then depending on the polymer itself, it may unzip back to monomer, and then you can recover that. And so for something like, say, plexiglass, polymethyl methacrylate, this one, you heat it up to pyrolysis temperatures, it'll completely unzip back to monomer, and you can polymerize it. And so Things like polystyrene, though, PVC, polyethylene, polypropylene, they're not nearly as well behaved. And so you heat them up to these high temperatures, and one, it's very energy intensive, and two, they don't necessarily cleanly unzip back to the monomer. They do other things. And so our strategy was, one, to use a less energy intensive approach. And so
Mm-hmm.
instead of needing to heat up, instead of needing to use fossil fuels or whatever energy to heat up the entire polymer to the temperature so you can depolymerize it, our strategy was to incorporate these little nanoparticles into the polymer, and then when you hit it with light, the nanoparticles will convert that light into heat.
Mm.
And then locally, you'll be reaching the temperatures you need to break open the backbone of the polymer and force unzipping back to the monomer.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so this is called photothermal conversion, when these nanoparticles convert light into heat. There's lots of different photochemical processes that can go on, but this particular one will even take sunlight and convert it and dissipate it as heat.
Okay.
So we have done experiments where we've incorporated these nanoparticles into the polymer to radiate with focused sunlight, and we can depolymerize.
One question about that then. Do you have to, does it have to be within the monomer structure? Like, do these nanoparticles have to be like, do you have to polymerize a monomer with these nanoparticles, let's say, present, so that they're in the monomer itself or the polymer? Or
there's lots of different ways, and this is something we're thinking about, how you want to incorporate them. Do you want to incorporate them in a post-consumer waste, like if they come into a recycling center, sprinkle in the powder, and then you can depolymerize it? Do you want to incorporate it into the material as it's being formulated? So, right, you do an extruder, right? You could extrude the polymer with the nanoparticles and incorporate it that way. The other one is you could polymerize. It would probably be the most efficient.
okay,
So then it's like, what do these nanoparticles do to the properties of the polymer or the product that you're making? Are they safe? Things like that. So these are all questions that we'll have to answer if we would decide to go that route.
Okay, so currently, right now, just so I understand too. Right now, it's, and this is, I mean, a lot of this is like proof of concept too. It's like you take a polymer, you put in the nanoparticles, and you radiate it, and then you've seen that you're able to, depolymerize back to the monomers, right? Is that okay?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
That's really cool. What I led to disclose what these nanoparticles are. Is that like
yeah, they're in our publication.
Okay.
So we're using carbon quantum dots. Other quantum dots, like maybe in your LEDs, like lead selenide, cat selenide, things like that, are used for electronic applications. Like nanoparticles are used in all different sorts of ways. We were really interested in using carbon-based nanoparticles. One, for ease of synthesis, right? They can come from organic matter. Two, they should be less environmentally toxic, right? It's not cadmium or lead or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we made these carbon quantum dots from vitamin C or ascorbic acid.
I was going to ask, like, what is the chemical composition of these things? Like, I don't even, like, what?
Yeah, so you can kind of think of it almost as like polycyclic aromatics, or like graphene or something like that. They're basically colloidal carbon, essentially. And depending what's on the surface, what is all in there depends on what your starting material is.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we use ascorbic acid, what we found is that there's quite a bit of oxygen content as well. It's mostly carbon, but there's oxygen content left over from the ascorbic acid. But the exact structure, it's not like a single molecule catalyst or anything like that. It is, yes.
It's really cool.
Essentially a polymerization of ascorbic acid into these colloidal small nanoparticles that will absorb light and then dissipate it off as heat.
Now, how much, and like, let's say, like, how much of these nanoparticles do you need to, let's say, depolymerize something like, I don't know, polyethylene or something like that? Like, how much do you need to do that?
Yeah, so we've been focused on polylactic acid, which is a common biorenewable polymer, and polystyrene. And so for those, it depends on how we incorporate it.
Okay.
And so if we incorporate it through like an extrusion process or through like a hot pressing process, you add the particles and then you sort of melt the polymer and mix it all together. That works really well to incorporate the particles, and you can get lower loadings. You can look at like 5 to 10 weight%. If you just do solid mixing of the two, so imagine you like grind up your polymer and then you manually mix in the nanoparticles. you don't get quite as efficient incorporation, and so you need to use a little bit higher loading of the particles, up to like 10 or 20 weight%.
Okay, that's really cool.
But I mean, one of our objectives, of course, is to get it, as low as possible as an additive, and hopefully it will add good material properties. Like nanoparticles can already be used in polymers to sort of strengthen the material. It could be a case where we add, these self-destruct buttons essentially into the polymer. They're completely fine while you're using it, and then when you want to depolymerize it, you just hit it with light, and it'll unzip back to monomer.
Do you think an issue though, it's like, what if what about like UV light from sunlight? Have you noticed that? Is that enough it's not enough? Interesting. Nope. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you need a pretty good intensity of photons to get this process to work, at least with these nanoparticles. So we've used focused sunlight.
Okay.
I mean, you can get other, machines that will do this. We were just using lenses to focus the sunlight and show that we could depolymerize it. But the beautiful thing is that these particles actually act like a photoprotectant.
Okay.
With just general, photon flux from ambient light, sunlight, what have you. So it can actually stabilize the polymer, even if it's a really unstable polymer generally. This isn't published, but we've shown that you incorporate these nanoparticles and they can be stable for months, and then you just hit it with more intense light and it'll depolymerize back to monomer.
That's really cool.
Even if the monomer would be photosensitive or anything like that, it's a photoprotectant, and so it prevents any other oxidative or photo degradation processes.
That's really cool. I'm excited to see what comes out of your lab next few months. It's super exciting work.
Yeah, we got some good stuff in the pipeline. So.
We'll be on the lookout for that. But in addition to depolymerization strategies, you also work on some polymerization strategies, right? I know you work a little bit. I don't know how big you are in the polymerization strategies. I know you recently, well, relatively recently anyway, like using cobalt to do radical polymerization. So I'll definitely let you talk about that area of research too, because getting cobalt to do polymerizations is definitely would be cool.
Yeah. So cobalt has been an interest of mine since I was in grad school. Mukiyama hydration reaction, and then Ryan Shenvey and others have put out some really cool work using cobalt-hydride to do functionalizations of alkenes. So I'd always been thinking about it. You should be able to use this for polymerization. You can use this discrete initiating species to start a polymerization, rather than typically when you run cobalt mediated radical polymerizations, you've just added an exogenous radical initiator. It'll get you polymer at the end. It'll be pretty well controlled, but as an organic chemist, I like to have as much control over the polymerization as possible and the end groups and things like that. And so we developed that strategy.
It's not our job to come up with, let's say, the applications of these polymers. We just try to make them. That's, not necessarily our job. That's the engineer's job. What can you use these for?
Yeah. Develop cool ways and make the polymers.
Yeah.
And so, we use that chemistry. It works so beautifully well. Like, this was a proposal that I had written for my academic proposals, and it worked pretty much exactly as I scripted it in the proposal. I don't know how often that happens. It was so beautiful. It just worked perfectly.
Right.
And my postdoc Sajad was the one who did that work, and it was beautiful.
Something that I noticed too is that you're able to do like polar monomers too, right? It's not. I think that's some important. I think is important to point out, because polar monomers are typically, I should take that back. A homo polymer made of polar monomers may not necessarily be difficult. It's the difficulty, I think, is in introducing polar monomers into non-polar monomers. But you're able to do it with like acrylates and stuff like that, right? So I don't know. Right now, you're able to do acrylate monomers, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
So with cobalt, cobalt is actually really cool because you can also pretty well control unactivated nonpolar monomers. So people have done radical ethylene polymerization with cobalt before, and you can switch between blocks between the polar and the nonpolar monomers, like acrylates and ethylene. I don't know if actually people have polymerized activates and ethylene, but maybe like vinyl acetate.
Right.
So it's not very active, but it is polar. They can polymerize things. And so what we've seen so far, it's really the initiation part that is specific to activated monomers like
Okay.
activates and acrylamides. And so when we switch to other monomers, what we see is that it's not fast enough, and then you just end up getting hydrogen formation and return of the cobalt complex to cobalt 2. So you don't get any initiation.
Okay.
And so we're looking to do some complex development to promote that initial hydrogen atom transfer, so we can initiate polymerization with these less activated non-polar monomers. Mm-hmm. Right? Because doing copolymerizations between ethylene and acrylates or vinyl acetate, right? Those are really cool.
That's always
as you're well aware.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably. I mean, that's always like the dream of are you able to can you selectively incorporate copolymerizations with both, like, let's say monomers available? I think that would be in controlling how much is incorporated is definitely always a polymer chemistry. Like, could you do that? Yep. So exciting to see what comes out of that next. But so you have a lot of really cool research going on. That any graduate students out there looking to work in polymer chemists, take a look at Princeton and your work there. So
thanks. Yep, definitely looking for graduate students. So.
But Professor Stache, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. It was super pleasure talking to you and hearing about your research. Like I said it before, but I look forward to seeing your work in this area coming out in the next few months and years, because it is an ongoing issue. It's really not going away. We definitely need a lot of top scientists working on these issues, and so it's from a like you said before too, from a chemistry point of view, like these are the kind of things that get researchers excited. I think these sorts of problems. So for the general public out there, people are working on these issues like we are. We're trying. It's not really that easy. Otherwise, we'd already see it. But I just want to thank you again for coming on today.
Yeah, people can check out our website too. We have different resources for sustainability and plastics recycling, and I think we're going to try and put together a podcast. To put in a little plug for our upcoming podcast.
I was going to say, I don't know. Be on the lookout for Professor Stache's group's podcast on general. I don't know what you have in mind. I mean, polymer chemistry, current. Like, I don't know. I'll let you. I want you to plug it. Like, I don't know what you guys have in mind for that.
Yeah, please. So I think we're really interested in trying to bring our research to the public, to let people know what we're working on, and also just to sort of highlight the challenges that we have with plastics and sustainability, highlight the opportunities, right? Why plastics are so important to our daily lives, but also what we need to do to sort of combat the plastics crisis and its impact on our environment. And so, we're going to, give the basics on polymer chemistry, how these things are made, where you might find them, and then we'll talk about different recycling strategies, which polymers are recycled where, how you should treat your plastics before putting them into a recycling bin, things like that. And then we'll do some interviews with other, prominent polymer chemists and researchers in the field too, so we can talk about their research.
That's exciting.
It'll be pretty fun. Yeah.
Is there a tentative first episode release date, or is this all is there a tentative date? I'm going to press you on it because I want to.
We were looking for this summer, but then the move set us back a little bit. So
fair enough. That is
hopefully this fall. Yeah, later this fall, I think we'll be getting our first episode out.
Well, I'll be sure to plug it. Be on the lookout for podcasting from Professor Erin Stache's lab on polymer chemistry. That's going to be super fun. I look forward to hearing about that then too. Anything else you want to plug? Anything else?
Chemistry is awesome. Organic chemistry is awesome. There's so much you can do with it. And I think everyone should at least take a look and take an interest, right? Yeah. You don't necessarily have to pursue it as a career, but I think I don't know. Yeah. I think chemistry is just one of the coolest subjects and so fundamental to our daily life. And everyone can have some appreciation for it.
When I was talking to Professor Matt Sigman, I really think a chemist has the most transferable skills, honestly. I mean, generally, you want to talk about working at the benchtop, people get really good at computational chemistry, data science, all the instruments that we work with, HPLC, NMR, I mean, NMR is physics,
Hmm.
guys. Like NMR is literally
Right.
physics, and we do that. So I mean, chemistry really has the most transferable skills, I believe, and I'll die on
Hmm.
that hill. That's fine. If you want to, any
Yep.
other STEM majors want to come at me, sure. All right, I will die on that hill. But
Yeah. Yeah.
thank you. I want to thank you again for coming on. It was super cool talking to you,
Yep.
and like I said, I look forward to hearing your podcast, but also your future research. So be on the lookout for that,
Yep.
everyone.
Thanks so much for the invitation. This was a lot
All
of
right,
fun.
thank you.
Yep. Yep. Bye.
All righty. So